Are you finding all the clues to your ancestor in those birth certificates? Not really sure? Well, in this video, I'm going to let you peek over my shoulder and watch as I analyze a couple different birth certificates and make sure that we are getting all the family history clues that we could possibly find in that record. There's a ton of them. Hi there. If we haven't met before, I am Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And this YouTube channel is designed to help you find your ancestor, grow your family tree, but not be overwhelmed in the process. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, you're in the right place. Okay, so let's talk all about birth certificates here. Now, if you are a genealogy researcher, you have probably searched and found ancestors' birth certificates, but you may have had trouble finding some of them. Now, part of the thing that I think it's important that we remember, and I get a lot of questions on this about not being able to find an ancestor's birth certificate, is the fact that birth certificates as we know them today are fairly modern records. Now, we can find birth records dating back in earlier times, but that birth certificate that we so often search for, they are actually modern. Many states didn't even require them until the 1900s, sometime, 1910s. So for example, I do a lot of research of my own ancestors here in North Carolina, and birth certificates were not even required until 1913. So that's pretty late when you consider a lot of the records that we're using and as far back as we trace our ancestors. Now, the other thing to think about is that just because the state said, okay, we're going to start requiring registration of births and issuing birth certificates, that full compliance for a lot of areas really did not happen for several years. And really here in where I research, many of the counties really didn't hit full compliance until about the First World War time period. So we had a lot of years where there should have been a birth certificate and maybe it just wasn't issued. Why? Well, there could be a number of reasons for that, but obviously I know from my ancestors is they lived way out. They were in a very rural area. They were farmers. Getting to town or having these things recorded was not necessarily high priority when you had a lot of other little ones running around to take care of, a farm to take care of. It was perhaps a home birth, may or may not have even been attended by a physician or a midwife. So there could be a lot of reasons why it would not have been actually created, even though technically there was supposed to be one. Okay, so just keep that in mind as your researcher. If you're having trouble finding and searching, make sure you're not researching for a birth certificate that was never created to begin with. And so keep that in your mind. But we're going to go ahead and assume that we have found that birth certificate that we are looking for. So let's take a look. I'm going to turn my camera around. I'm going to walk you through a couple of birth certificates that I have looked at and found interesting, and just make sure we're getting everything out of those records for you. So let me go ahead and pop those up here. Okay, so here is the first one that you can see. And I am super excited about this one. This is actually my grandfather's birth certificate that we can see here. And his name was Crafton Talbot. And we see that it's a very standard birth certificate. He was born in Virginia. We see up here, let me grab my pointer so that we can see that a little bit easier. Okay, so he was born in the county of Mecklenburg, district of Bluestone, there in Virginia. His name was actually Arthur Crafton Talbot. An interesting name, not a family name, and took me many, many years and a lot of oral history questions to find out that actually Crafton was the name of a family friend, and that's how he came to be known as Crafton, because he went by his middle name. All right, so boy or girl? He was a boy. He was not a twin or a triplet, so this was not a multiple birth, and that will be indicated here. If this was a multiple birth, then typically it will tell you twin or triplet or however many, and it will tell you the number in the order of birth that this child would have been. So you do want to check this for that particular information. There have been occasions, I will tell you, where I have seen twins born and they were just both mentioned on the same document. Were the parents married? So this is an important clue for us. Yes, his parents were married. So that tells me by his date of birth, November 27th, 1916, that his parents were married. So I know in my search for a marriage date, I need to look prior to that November date in 1916. And so here we have his parents, B.H. Talbot, and his mother was Esther Lee Richardson. All right, so let's take a look at his father right here, B.H. Talbot. He there gives the present address. So This particular birth certificate not only tells us that the child was born in Bluestone, Mecklenburg County, Virginia, but it tells us that of the post office address for the father, which was Virginia, Route 1. It tells me he was a white male and that he was 29 years old at his last birthday. This allows me to start to infer a birth year for B.H. Talbot. So not only do I now know the birth date for Arthur Crafton Talbot, I can infer the birth date for each of the parents. In this case, B.H. Talbot was 29 years old. I just have to do a little math and come up with a birth year. All right. We know that the father was born in Halifax County, Virginia. Just so you know, that's the next neighboring county to Mecklenburg County. He was in farming, and number of children born to this mother, including is number 1. So he is the first child born to this mother. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's look at the mother, Esther Lee Richardson. I do make note of the spellings, though, as we know, oftentimes spelling is a little fluid when it comes to genealogy research. She is also from Jeffers, Virginia. Not always a given, guys, but in this case, they are living together. We know they're married. She is a white female, and she was actually 20 at her last birthday. So we just have to do a little math, and we come up with her birth year, date year as well. We can infer that she was born around 1896, and indeed she was. So this is a really helpful way to, again, basically we have a specific birth date and 2 inferred birth years on this one birth certificate. Now, she was born over in Pennsylvania County, which is on the other side of Halifax County, and she is a housewife. She had 1 child. So this is really important information, this number 20 here slot. It tells us, as I had mentioned earlier, the number of children that were born to this mother, including this birth, and that is 1. So she's only given birth once. It is to this child, Arthur Crafton Talbot. And so we know that there are no earlier children that we need to look for that may have died in infancy. The other thing that's really interesting is you will also typically see not only that about number of children born, but number of children of this mother who are living, including present birth. So these can be different. Again, they match here because Arthur is the first child and he is living, obviously. So this is a great place to maybe find indication that there might be other children who may have not survived infancy or survived long enough to be in other records like census records. This is also great information. It does tell us the exact time that they were born. He was born, he was alive. It tells us the doctor. This is kind of interesting. I do like to have the name of the physician and the address. And the reason I say that is because there are times, there are not a lot, I will be honest, but sometimes doctors' notes, diaries, whatever, can end up in special collections at archives. And it's kind of cool to be able to read through them and see their notes that they've made on their patients that they would see as they went house to house and made house calls. And so that does happen occasionally. So if I ever have the opportunity to perhaps look in those types of collections at an archives, it's helpful for me to know who the physician was who delivered that child. And then, of course, it tells us who actually when this was filed and by whom at the county office. So this is a very standard birth certificate, gives me, but again, a lot of great information. 3, basically 1 birth date, 2 inferred births. Parents, we know we can infer a marriage date is prior to the date of birth in 1916. So we can get some really nice information. All right. Now, before I go to the next slide and show you a really cool twist on birth certificates, be sure and hit that subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner. That way you will be notified when I create new videos here at the Are You My Cousin YouTube channel, and you will not miss a thing happening over here. Okay, let me show you this really cool birth certificate. Okay, now it looks very similar to the other one. This is also a Virginia birth certificate. This is for a Villa Lewis, and at first glance, it's very standard, just like we were looking at with Arthur's or Crafton. So she was born in Wise County in the Richmond district. Her name was Villa Lewis, and we know that she was a girl. This gave check marks. She was actually, I think this was kind of more of she was not a triplet or a twin. I think this is just kind of almost a dash, because I did a little further research and she was a single birth, not a triplet or a twin. Her parents were married. again, so her birth date was October 18th, 1916. So we know that the parents were married prior to that. We have the parents, her father, John D. Lewis, where he was living in Blackwood, Virginia. His wife, Hannah Smith, also still living at that address. And we know, unfortunately, there was a tear here, so we don't know exactly how old he was. I'm going to think 26, but again, I would have to confirm that because unfortunately, the number is torn away and we cannot see that here. So we would need to do a little bit more research. But we do know that the mother, Hannah, was 24 years old. We can do our math, find out, and for a birth year for that. They were both born in Kentucky. So again, points us in the directions to look for their records on the parents back into Kentucky. He was a railroad conductor and she was a housewife. She had 3 children who were born to her, including Villa, and she has all 3 children are now living. So that's very standard, very much what we were seeing on Crafton's. It tells us a little bit more that she was born alive at 6 p.m. Gives us the doctor where he was located. Now, this little information box right here on the bottom left. Now, most certificates I've seen will have this. The order may be a little different, but here we go. It says additional information as to question 2, so the name of the child here, is added from a supplemental report. So there was information and a change made to this birth certificate. The information came from the mother on February 24th, 1942. Okay, so this actually, the child was born in the child was born in 1916, and in 1942, a change was needing to be made. This needed to be amended. So I thought that was really interesting. And I will point out here, when you look at this name, it sort of looks like things were kind of written over. I actually saw that when I first looked at this. I thought, looks like they, we're trying to correct a mistake here. And so indeed, we found that. So we know that there's additional information. I did find this in the ancestry.com database. When you find this in a database, be sure and check the next page forward, which is oftentimes the back of the certificate. So here's what happened. When I clicked forward, here's what was attached to the back of that birth certificate. That mother provided information in 1942 about the physician. So we have the state registrar. She says, please change the name of Vera Lewis to Villa Lewis, which is her correct name. And if you look back, you can sort of see, if you squint your eyes just right, how Villa was written over. Perhaps there's an R there and maybe a little A there. They've actually gone in and written on top of this particular record. And then, so she signs her name. She's living in Appalachia, Virginia. And she says, I'm sending you the name and the birth dates of all of the children. So she's, again, showing information that she has all this information. These are all of her children, the orders of her children. And so we can see, as a genealogy, not only do we get Villa's correct name, we know that we might have seen a record with where she was written as Vera, but her name is actually Villa. We know, obviously, her mother. We know all that information from the birth certificate, but we also know all of her siblings, including the ones that were born after her. So remember, Villa was number 3, and there were 3 kids living at the time she was born. And then we have 5 more children that were born. How cool is that? So you never quite know what you're going to find. Make sure you're checking every single box when it comes to looking at those birth certificates. In other words, make sure every single line that is filled in, every single square, make sure you understand what it says and what it means. All right. And don't skip anything, because if you do, you're going to end up having to come back, and it's just going to slow your research down. Okay, let me come back and see you guys. There we go. I hope you found that helpful to really look over and see how I actually analyze a birth certificate for an ancestor. It is a very simple process. It's actually very similar to how I analyze a lot of records. I really start at the top and just work my way through. I do not skip a box. I do not skip a line. I want to make sure I understand everything that's being asked for, everything that's being given, and if there's anything that's different that has happened or that looks different or unique to that particular record, I want to explore why is it that way. Okay, so if you would like to learn more about how to Find your ancestor's date of birth, or perhaps as you're looking for a date of death or a date of marriage. Be sure and watch the video on your screen now, and you will be on your way.